Welcome, opera lovers, and public radio listeners to another discussion of a Virginia opera production. I know that for many of you, Madama Butterfly of Puccini is a fave. It's one that we in the opera business tenderly, lovingly refer to as a cash cow. We know it will sell because it's popular. It's popular because it's good. I'll tell you a little bit that when I was a young piano student growing up in Evanston, Illinois, and quite contemptuous of all this opera stuff, Madama Butterfly was the opera that kind of wove its spell on me, knocked down the walls of my attitude problem, and caused me to have my first boyish infatuation with opera. Once I fell for Puccini, I fell hard. I listened to Madama Butterfly over and over and over until there were no grooves left in my LP recording, and kind of gorged on all of those sumptuous melodies and luscious harmonies and over-the-top dramatics. And I have to say that now, all these years later, it's about 10 years later, Madama Butterfly doesn't mean the same thing to me that it did when I was 12. Back then, it was all about the melody and the sound of the voices and the sensuousness of it. Today, I see the craftsmanship in ways that I couldn't have processed when I was in junior high school. And it's all of that I kind of want to bring to your attention today. I want you to hear when you come to our production at the Harrison Opera House. I want you to hear what I hear in this score and see if we can figure out why it has stood the test of time. Of course, it almost didn't stand the test of time. Madama Butterfly has a history, as you probably know, of being one of the most catastrophic debacles at its first performance at La Scala in 1904, right up there with Carmen, La Traviata, Barbara of Seville, some of the other storied failures. I don't have the time today to go into what caused all of that. You can go on the internet or even to our website at vaopera.org and read a little about the history of the performance annals of this opera. But I will, a few minutes into this broadcast today, we will give you a hint as to why Puccini had some of the blame to shoulder for that. He did have to make some changes. The butterfly that they heard on that first night is not the butterfly that you will hear in Norfolk, Richmond, and Fairfax on our stage. Now, one of the aspects of craftsmanship that I like to point out is that there's a difference between operatic music and, say, music of the Broadway theater. Opera music has what I would call a literary function. It is to Broadway as perhaps a novel of Dickens or Hemingway is to a thriller that you might take to the beach. And by this I mean that all the devices of fiction that you're familiar with from your English classes that are available to novelists, things such as symbolism, metaphor, foreshadowing, and in particular, point of view. These are devices that have corollaries in the opera as well. Operatic composers utilize all of these devices, and that's what I mean by a literary function. Now, in particular today, we're going to get an object lesson in how composers manipulate us through point of view. And in that regard, I find Lieutenant Pinkerton, that cad of an American who ditches poor Cho-Cho-san and keeps her waiting faithfully to no avail throughout the course of the action. Lieutenant Pinkerton is quite an interesting achievement in manipulation of point of view. I believe there are two Lieutenant Pinkertons. I believe that when he's on stage, either by himself or with Sharpless and Goro and Suzuki, that we see him through what I would call the third-person omniscient, that point of view in which we see the character through the narrator's eyes, through the composer's eyes, if you will. And we see him objectively in the harsh light of day with his flaws right there exposed. But when Pinkerton is on stage with Cho-Cho-san, I believe that he's a different person, that the point of view shifts to Butterfly's prism of how she perceives him. And suddenly he is a perfect lover. See if you agree with me. I'll make my case for that. Now, there's a formula in many Italian operas in that, the glamour girl of the opera is the prima donna, the leading soprano, and so composers usually delay the prima donna's entrance. And therefore, we meet the tenor first, usually. This happens in most operas, familiar operas that you can name. Lucia di Lammermoor is a notable exception, but Butterfly is no exception. Pinkerton starts the opera at the little house in Nagasaki where he's going to be wed, and he's waiting for his teenage bride, Cho-Cho-san, Madama Butterfly, to arrive. He's there with his American friend, Sharpless, and so this is the moment when he can have the stage to himself and sing a big solo. It'll be his last moment to get a big solo all to himself. So like Radames, like Count Almaviva, Rossini, like the Duke of Mantua, he's going to make the most of it and sing an aria. And this aria, Dovunque al mondo, he describes the life of an American sailor. He calls himself a Yankee vagabond, Yankee vagabondo. And he describes how Yankee vagabonds sail the world in search of adventure, ignoring risks, taking the treasures of the world to make them their own. Now, it's fine, except there's something odd in this aria. I want you to listen a couple of phrases in. Pinkerton stops his own aria and interrupts himself with an aside to Sharpless. See if you can hear it. You'll hear it in rather heavily accented English, but I think you can make it out. Here's Carlo Bergonzi with Pinkerton's opening solo. Did you catch that? Did you hear what he said? He said milk, punch, or whiskey. He stops his big solo scene to turn to his friend and say, hey, can I get you something to drink? You all right? Want some pretzels? Some peanuts? You good? Okay. And goes back to his aria. You've got to be kidding me. Say what? Dude, it's your aria. That's a little too casual. See, this is a very telling point of characterization. I mean, in Aida, does Radames start Celeste Aida and interrupt himself? Celeste Aida. Wait a minute. Did I leave the stove on when I left the pyramid this morning? No, you don't do that. Does De Grieux interrupt his Donna non vidi mai to say, oh, note to self, must pick up dry cleaning later? No, it's your aria. See, Pinkerton can't take his own solo aria very seriously. He's too casual. How seriously do you think he's going to take his relationships with other people? We're getting the idea. This is Lieutenant Shallowton, not just Lieutenant Pinkerton. Now, we continue with his scene, which again is this objective third-person point of view. And he's going to describe his feelings about Butterfly to his friend Sharpless. Sharpless says, tell me about this girl. What, are you in love with her? Is she good looking? What's the deal? Well, it's familiar formula, again, that in Italian opera, if you want to know how the tenor feels about the girl, listen to him describe her when she's not there to hear him. Of course, once they're together, he's going to sweet talk her. Oh, honey, baby, your eyes like cherries, your lips like berries, your ears like bananas, or whatever. I forget. It's been a long time since I sweet talked a girl. I forget what boys say to girls. But that kind of stuff, you know, it's when the girl is not there that you're liable to get his honest feelings. And usually the guy is smitten. He's passionate. He makes grandiose statements about his passion for the woman. There's so many examples. For instance, we were just speaking of De Grieux in Puccini's Manon Lescaut. Here's Desgrieux talking about Manon when she's not there to hear him. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Passion right from the heart. And in Tosca, there's a parallel scene. Cavaradossi in the church painting a portrait of another woman, but singing about how this woman can't compare to his Tosca. You get the idea. Tenors get passionate when they're describing the woman that has inflamed their hearts with love. So let's hear Pinkerton now in the same position. Cho-Cho-san is not there yet. He's going to describe her beauty, her charm, her bewitching grace in his solo Amore o Grillo. Well, that was a little different. You know, it almost, if you had a different kind of orchestration, say a jazz combo accompanying that song, that would be a little like popular music. It basically is popular music. It's very disengaged. It's very phoned in. Did you hear that little passage? Alla statura, da-dum, da-dum-dum. Yeah, nothing says passion like a monotone, right? So we get the idea. There's no there. This is a shallow, superficial, disengaged man who does not have depths of feeling about much of anything. Well, now that's you're going to see a different Pinkerton in a few minutes when Butterfly finally arrives on the scene. And setting up Butterfly's entrance, there's something I want to point out that, by the way, here's a little trivia for you. Both this season and next season at Virginia Opera will end with Japanese-themed operas as their the final production of the year. Next year, Mikado. And another point of commonality, Mikado and Madama Butterfly share a melody. In both cases, it is an authentic Japanese melody. Both Sullivan and Puccini made some effort to incorporate a few authentic Japanese folk tunes or pop songs into their score. The music is thoroughly Western. In each case, they're kind of scotch taping a Japanese melody onto the surface of what is highly Western music. And the one that they both used is a Japanese popular song called My Prince. Now, this is famously employed in Mikado for the entrance of the Mikado in that Miyasama number. You all remember that one. course, using a song called My Prince is highly appropriate in Mikado because the Mikado is the royalty in that cast. Well, there's also royalty in Madama Butterfly. That's Prince Yamadori, the somewhat westernized Japanese wealthy playboy who's the only Japanese person not to completely reject Butterfly when she abandons her Buddhist background. And he continually, during the period of her vigil waiting for Pinkerton, he continually drops by and makes various proposals of marriage and other hanky-panky to her. And in Act 2, when he's about to make his entrance, he is accompanied by a somewhat flashier version of the same melody, My Prince. Now, I mentioned the use of authentic Japanese tunes, and there are several. I won't bore you by enumerating and playing excerpts of all of them. You'll know them when you hear them, when they sound kind of Asian and different from a typical Puccini melody. I mention this because you would think that there's nobody more Japanese than Cho-Cho-san, right? You would think that her initial entrance would be marked by a very Japanese, Asian-sounding melody. Actually, far from it. Again, this is a use of music in order to characterize one of the cast members because, see, Cho-Cho-san already knows that she's marrying an American. In her mind, this makes her an American. So Puccini gives her a completely Western tune to sing for her lovely entrance aria, one of the most beautiful entrances in all of opera. And by the way, again, Puccini uses a little bit of formula, not that we mind, but in most Puccini operas, you hear the heroine before you see her. You hear Mimi, then you see her. You hear Tosca, then you see her. And the same goes with Cho-Cho-san, who is climbing up that hill. The little house is at the top of a small hill in Nagasaki. And there's something interesting also that I want to point out here. Most people think of classical composition as terribly complex and sophisticated. Oh, those 8-voice fugues of Bach, those complicated textures. You have to go to theory class and conservatory to understand it. It's over your head. Well, actually, Butterfly's aria consists of 4 notes. Da, 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 which are actually just repeated over and over and over, climbing higher and higher. Da, dum, da, da. Da dum da 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 da. Yeah, that's about as complicated as it gets sometimes. However, again, there's a literary function here because it's describing both what she's physically doing and how she feels. You see, she's climbing a hill, so therefore her motive climbs higher and higher. The music is illustrating what she's doing, and also it indicates this growing sense of anticipation and excitement. She's approaching her dream fairy tale wedding, and as the excitement mounts, so does her voice. Yeah, that's a pretty good opening aria, isn't it? Absolutely. We are just we can't breathe. It's so gorgeous. However, there's something interesting here. We referenced at the beginning of this broadcast, and by the way, you're listening to my discussion of Madama Butterfly here on WHRO Public Radio in Hampton Roads. Um, we mentioned the catastrophic failure of that first performance of Madame Butterfly. Now, part of that was owing to some envious rivals of Puccini, some composers who resented his success. By now, he was the Andrew Lloyd Webber of the day, rich and famous. And so, yes, there were some composers who organized a little conspiracy, a little plot to plant booers and hissers in the crowd. But, there was laughter. At one point, the audience cried out during a certain passage. They said, "Boo, boo, we've heard this before. That sounds exactly like La Boheme. You've run out of ideas. Give us something original. Boo." And you know what? They weren't wrong. Now, in that very aria, as she climbs higher and higher, finally, when she gets to the point where we can see her at the top of the hill, that's when those four notes, da, 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 sort of grow into what becomes the love theme. Dee, da, ya, da, 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 dum. That theme is not what they heard. And what you just heard Renata Tebaldi sing is not what the opening night crowd in La Scala heard. Now, on the piano, I recorded that theme. Let's hear the version that we know today as I play it on the keyboard. Now, listen to the recording I made of the original theme, the way they heard it on that spring night in 1904. Oh, now that tail end of that phrase, dee-dum, ta-ya-dum. Puccini lovers, does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because Mimi sings it in her aria, Mi chiamano Mimi, just like this. So guess what? The audience was right. They've got good ears for opera over there in Italy. They know opera melodies like we know football statistics. It's their NFL. And they were very quick to hear Puccini relying on a formula, a cadence that he had used before. That's not unusual, folks. You hear similar phrases in Rachmaninoff all the time. You hear similar cadential formulas in Mozart and Beethoven all the time. All composers have their fingerprints, their musical DNA, those little turns of phrase that help us to identify which composer we're talking about. But that one crossed the line, probably, and by George, when Puccini retreated to revamp the score, that was a detail that he fixed, and probably all for the better. Now, I don't have time to show you completely how this works, but I do have a small example just to show you how the entire opera takes care musically to differentiate between East and West. This opera, the theme of this opera basically is the incompatibility of East and West in cultural terms. And Puccini, one of the great dramatists that we have in music, takes care to keep these distinctions quite vivid. Throughout the opera, the native Japanese people, Goro, Yamadori, and especially Butterfly's relatives there at the wedding, they are characterized with rapid-moving music, energetic music that goes in quick time values with a sense of urgency, maybe to indicate the cadence of the Japanese conversation that you hear if you're an American and don't understand a word. And so the Americans, on the other hand, tend to speak in long, broad phrases, taking their time. Well, this is brought to a head in the scene just before the wedding vows are made in Act 1, when the relatives are gossiping. Some of them are saying, oh, he's ugly. Others are saying, oh, he's handsome like a god, but I think they'll get divorced. They're gossiping in a kind of a chattery background, whereas Sharpless sings, Amico Fortunato, oh, you lucky dog, you've hit the jackpot with this girl. And in this ensemble, you hear that contrast of East and West. East and West vividly characterized. And when you come to this opera, that's something to keep your ears open for. Listen to when Goro speaks or Yamadori speaks. It's different from the way that Sharpless and Pinkerton express themselves just in the nature of the musical phrasing. He takes care with this stuff, does Giacomo Puccini. Now we come to a pivotal scene in the opera, pivotal on many levels. It's the scene just after the vows are exchanged and the wedding toast is being given, when Butterfly's uncle, a Buddhist priest called the Bonze, crashes the wedding. He is madder than a wet-setting hen because he has discovered that Butterfly has been to the Christian mission and has agreed to adopt her new American husband's Christian religion. Now, I will share with you that my sister, Juliet Winters Carpenter, has been living in Japan for the past 40 years or so. And I've been to visit her over there. I know something about Japanese culture that I've picked up from my sister, who is quite familiar. There is a phenomenon in Japan, which of course is one of the most closed societies culturally that you can find on the planet. The phenomenon of the gaijin. Gaijin is a term that originally meant an invader. Back when no one was permitted to come on the island nation of Japan, intruders were called gaijin. But that term has morphed into a broader meaning. These days it means one who is set apart, not a member of society, not part of the culture. You know, we live in the most diverse and open culture in the United States of America, and we have these terms like African American, Latin American, Asian American. There is no corollary for that in Japan. You are Japanese or you are gaijin. My sister has lived there for 40 years. She's a tenured professor at a college in Kyoto. She has many close friends. She's treated with great civility and graciousness by the Japanese, who are the most gracious and civil people on the planet. They have no crime rate. But she remains gaijin, not a member, not accepted. That's something that's difficult to understand for us Westerners. And the big tragedy, why does Butterfly kill herself? Is it because after 3 years she discovers that her husband doesn't love her and she's so heartbroken that she kills herself? Not at all. Actually, these temporary marriages were commonplace in Japan once Japan was open to the West. The brides never killed themselves, but that's because they had a culture to go back to. In rejecting Buddhism and becoming Christian, Butterfly has volunteered to make herself gaijin. She no longer has anything she's between the double and the deep blue sea. There's nothing to go back to once Pinkerton has moved on and married someone else. There's no culture to belong to anymore. Therefore, that's her tragedy, that she has chosen to become an outcast, gaijin. Now, here is the moment when her relatives renounce her, but the other interesting thing is, listen to Pinkerton. Suddenly, he is a different person, in my opinion. It's not his words. He's saying the sort of disrespectful, flip things you might expect Benjamin Franklin Pinkerton to say. He's saying to the Bonze, hey, you, quiet, clear out of here. We don't need this Buddhist foolishness in my house, okay? You clear out of here right now. But it's not the words, it's the music. Listen to the heroic Dudley Do-Right character of the knight in shining armor springing to the defense of his maiden. Gone is the Pinkerton who is casual and flip and interrupts his own arias. Now he sounds engaged and passionate because his woman has been wronged. Now I know it's not so much in the words, but it is in the music, and I don't think Butterfly is really listening to the words. She is now seeing what she wants to see and hearing what she wants to hear, her knight in shining armor. And it goes on now into that famous duet, the part you all love, the music to which Glenn Close seduced Michael Douglas in the Boiled Bunny movie Fatal Attraction, along with Tristan und Isolde, the most romantic and erotic of all love duets. You know, that was one thing that Giuseppe Verdi did not do. Verdi was not a ladies' man the way Puccini was, and if you listen to most of Verdi's love duets, particularly in Aida, which opens our season next year, a lot of his love duets sound like halftime at the Ohio State football game. They tend to be vigorous, but not especially erotic. Well, here we get into eroticism, but not right away. Once again, here's where I find really compelling evidence that we're seeing Pinkerton from a distorted point of view, which is Cho-Cho-san's. Cho-Cho-san is devastated after her relatives announce, "Ti rineghiamo, we renounce you," and they stomp off in a huff. She's 15 years old. She's devastated. She's sobbing convulsively. Well, the Pinkerton that I know, I think he would react. I hear him doing an Archie Bunker right now. "Oh, geez. Listen, I don't need the waterworks, okay? Come on, stop your boo-hooing. Come on, let's go inside. This isn't what I paid for, you understand?" But he doesn't. He's perfect. Suddenly, he's Mr. Empathy. He's kind. He's gentle. He understands. He says, "Sweetheart, child, bimba, non piangere, don't cry. It'll be okay." He says, "Listen, all the Japanese relatives and Buddhist uncles in all of Japan aren't worth one little tear sliding down your pretty face." And she snuffles up at him and, "Davvero? Really?" He's gentle and kind. Where did this guy come from? Non piango più. I won't cry anymore. Now again, the Pinkerton I know from the top of the scene, from the top of Act 1, would likely have responded at this point like this. "Good. That's better. That's more like it. Come on, get your clothes off. Where's the bedroom in this little shack anyway? Time to get busy." And he doesn't. What follows, now there's this extended love duet, which may actually sound just kind of spontaneous and like one impetuous melodic idea after another, or what we musicians call through composed. It's anything but. Again, Puccini's quite a craftsman. This is a highly organized piece of music in 4 sections, each with its own unique substructure. That's why it works so well. But we don't need to go into all that. What I want to point out is that the first big section following that introduction you just heard is anything but erotic. Pinkerton, it's mellow, it's relaxed. Pinkerton sings Viene la sera. Ah, night is falling. He and Butterfly, they're not in a hurry. I don't hear any sexual urgency. They're just holding hands, watching the sun set over the city of Nagasaki, just enjoying each other's company, basking in the glow. Really? It makes me think, listeners, have you seen those commercials on TV for Cialis? That certain men's pharmaceutical product. You know the one I mean, the man and the woman in the 2 bathtubs? They're in 2 bathtubs, so obviously they're not in a real hurry to make love. On a hillside, enjoying nature, watching the sunset, just holding hands, just basking, happy to be together. That's what we're getting? Well, that's what we get at the beginning of this duet. How mellow. Well, eventually, of course, it is time to become ardent, to become passionate, and to become erotic. Now, we're all adults here, right? If you've got small children in the room, either switch the channel or send them off to play, because we need to talk about sex, my friends. In the opera, we don't really, I saw a fairly sexually explicit trailer for a new film version of Don Giovanni the other day. However, generally in the opera, we don't want to watch the lovers make love. We don't want to see them naked rolling around on a bed doing what men and women do. They sing nice romantic love duets, but it's important for you to realize that the music to a love duet is very often a surrogate for the actual act of lovemaking, and the shape and pace of the music is usually designed to simulate what happens in the bedroom. Pardon me if we get a little frank here, but there are just some issues that I want you to understand. It's a substitute for the visual act that we're not going to see. For instance, in the second big section, there is a moment when Pinkerton is suddenly, making his claim for her, you are mine, so forth and so on, and he sings a very ardent phrase, accompanied by an accompaniment figure in the brass. And friends, I don't know how else to describe this brass passage other than to say that it is a throbbing. It throbs. You know where I'm going here. You remember from sex ed class in the 8th grade when the body sends blood rushing to... Never mind, we don't need to talk about that. Just listen to Pinkerton with his throbbing brass. Pretty good throbbing musically. Now, there comes another large section, the third big section of the duet, in which Butterfly is now also becoming aroused. And don't listen to the voice, listen to the orchestra. You're going to hear a phrase kind of with this sort of contour. Da-dee-da-dum, da, da-dee-da-da-dum, da. Getting higher and higher in a contour that I can only describe with the word thrusting. We've had throbbing, now listen to thrusting. Throbbing, thrusting. Well, there's only one thing left to do, which is to consummate the relationship with a musical climax. We're going to hear now a little more extended version of the very end of this fabulous love duet. And what I want to point out is you'll recognize it because remember our four-note theme that we had for Butterfly's entrance? Dee-dum-da-da. This is a recap. We're going to get that same theme. Her entrance aria is used to end Act 1. Now, that's very nice and tidy from a formal organization point of view. Again, Puccini the craftsman, he's giving some architecture, some design to Act 1. It's like when you're designing a Roman temple, if you've got a pillar on the right, then you want a pillar on the left. So there's balance and symmetry. So not only do you get a nice, pleasing formal symmetry with the use of this theme, but again, remember we said that the climbing nature of that theme showed Butterfly's mounting excitement and anticipation of the excitement of her wedding. Well, now it's a different kind of excitement, the building sexual excitement and arousal, before it again bursts into that rewritten love theme that we changed so it wouldn't sound like La Boheme, and a clash of cymbals signifying, well, you know what it signifies. By the end of this music, you'll probably want to light up a cigarette. I don't remember cymbals on my wedding night, but it was a long time ago. I don't know. Anyway, moving right along, that's the end of Lieutenant Pinkerton as the ideal lover slash hero slash Prince Charming slash husband. When we next see him, the point of view will have shifted back to that of Puccini. Of course, in Act 2, it's 3 years later. She's now a much more mature and poised woman of 18 years, Cho-Cho-san is a little different from Tosca, Mimi, some of the other heroines who are essentially the same character at the end of the opera as they were at the beginning, maybe just sicker or deader. Cho-Cho-san actually shows quite a bit alone of Puccini's heroines, quite a bit of character development. In Act 1, she's quite girlish. She cries easily. She says giddy things like, "Oh, I'm the happiest girl in all of Japan," and so forth. Now, adversity has calmed her down a bit. You're going to hear a much more poised and womanly character. And, of course, by the end of the show, she's the strongest person of all of them. And immediately we get this Un bel dì. And again, she's grown up. She is now the one comforting Suzuki, the maid, who is distraught at the fact that they're about to run out of money, and Pinkerton shows no signs of returning. Suzuki is often portrayed as an older character, but now it's Butterfly who is maternal, and this most famous of Puccini arias, Un bel dì, One Fine Day, is Cho-Cho-san's attempt to be nurturing and maternal to Suzuki, comfort her, and help her to understand that, of course, he will come back. And what follows is not a typical opera aria. You know, most opera arias are in the form of a song. They have verses or stanzas and a refrain. Almost all of Verdi's arias are like that, even up to the end of his career. This is more what we call through composed. There's very little repetition. It is more like a soliloquy or a monologue. And again, I find features of interest. How do composers, what are their values, what are their aims when they select their musical ideas? Is it always just about beauty? Is it always just about melodic charm and a toe-tapping, lively melody that you, the listener, will like? No, they want you to like their music and find it beautiful. But I'll tell you my definition of beauty in music. I think this is the only workable definition that applies in all cases. It's when you tell the truth about people. That's when you have psychological truth about human beings, and that's filled to the brim in Un bel dì. First of all, this opening melody that you all know. You've all heard this sung in numerous recitals, sometimes horribly. Dee da 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 dum da 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 da. I want to point out the contour. It starts high and it goes low. This is not just because it's a pretty tune. It's giving you information about the character. It's making a distinction between hope and assurance. Butterfly does not hope that he comes back. She knows he will come back. If she was hoping, the contour of the melody would be rising. Gee, I really hope he comes back. But that's not it. She says, I know he will return. When you're making a declarative statement in which you're very confident, your voice goes down. With that in mind, understand that what you're hearing here is not a melody to an aria, it's Butterfly's credo. And actually, that's the last we hear of that theme until, again, the very end, when it comes back, again, providing symmetry to the overall design and help provide a pleasing architecture. Puccini is always conscious of this. Now, in between comes a sort of a stream of consciousness description in her fantasy of what it will be like the day that Pinkerton arrives. And she imagines herself having seen his ship pull into the harbor, waiting till the moment when he climbs the hill and she can see him. In Italian, the word for waiting is aspetta. We wait. And listen to, in this next track, again, she's describing that moment of impatient waiting, but don't listen to the voice. listen to the orchestra. You'll notice that the orchestra just vacillates between one chord and another. Back and forth and back and forth. Very simple. And why does it do that? Did Puccini run out of pretty harmonies? Did his inspiration flag? No, it's very inspired. What the orchestra is doing is what you do when you're standing waiting at a bus stop for the bus to come, impatient, shifting your weight from one foot to the other. That's what we get in the orchestra right here. Now, comes that moment when Sharpless, her American friend, has come with a letter. Pinkerton has written a Dear Cho-Cho-san letter intended to break up with her, to let her know in a gentle way that he has moved on and married an American wife. It's a famous scene. It has a little tiptoeing theme in the orchestra, very quiet so that we can hear Sharpless read in what is a very conversational tone, the way you would read a letter in real life. It's not the moment for a big declarative melodic statement. And again, I find in this duet some more evidence, some more support for my argument that there was something false about that love duet back in Act 1. Just as Pinkerton seemed to be a little bit more empathetic and kind in that love duet than I think he probably was in real life. You know, I think it's possible that as we saw that love duet in Act 1, it was not the duet, it was not happening in real time in the present moment. I think it's possible that we were seeing it the way Butterfly remembers it in her idealized, distorted memory 3 years later during the period of time covered in Act 2. Maybe we're seeing it in her memory, because the same thing happens during this letter. Everything that Sharpless says, he says, Pinkerton writes to you, Dear Cho-Cho-san, it's been 3 years since I saw you. Oh, she says, he's been counting the time too. He still loves me. Everything in that letter is distorted, and to her is evidence of their mutual devotion.
Amico, cercherete quel bel fior di fanciulla.
Dice proprio così?
Sì, così dice, ma se ad ogni momento
Taggio, più nulla.
da quel tempo felice 3 anni son passati.
Anche lui li ha contati.
E forse Butterfly non mi rammenta più.
Non lo rammento, Suzuki, dillo tu.
Pazienza, says Sharpless. Realizing this is hopeless, he has to put the letter away, and he just asks her bluntly, Sweetie, what are you going to do if he doesn't come back? Which is like a kick in the solar plexus from a mule to this girl, who has clearly not considered it. She describes that there would be nothing left for her. She knows that she is gaijin by now. She says, well, I would have to go back and be a geisha again and earn my living dancing and singing for strange men. Now, what I find interesting, I'll play you a little music that accompanies her envisioning of this purgatory of being a geisha. We've noticed that Butterfly never sings authentic Japanese tunes. She always is singing in a Western manner, starting from her entrance aria. But right now, listen to how there is an extremely alien, exotic, highly Japanese geisha tune to describe this horrible vision. So that music communicates to us in the audience that Butterfly now feels very alien towards her own culture. The use of that Japanese sounding music with the exotic symbols means that to her this is an idea that she can't tolerate. And that music will be the last thing we hear as the curtain comes down. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time to play the music of the Vigil. Actually, that's a shame. It's the scene that Puccini really was anxious to set to music when he saw the dramatic version in David Belasco's drama, Madama Butterfly, as when he saw it in London. But, of course, the time comes when Butterfly realizes that Pinkerton is on his way. But when we see Pinkerton, she's not there. She has stayed awake all night long. She can't keep her eyes open. Suzuki sends her to bed for a nap, promising to let her know when her husband is there. So again, Pinkerton is not with Butterfly when he shows up with Kate, his American wife, and they've come to collect the baby, and because he knows that Cho-Cho-san has born his son. So again, that point of view trick, we're being manipulated. We see Pinkerton as the cad that he is. Now, in the original version, Pinkerton was a cameo only. Again, in that first performance, he didn't have much, if anything, to sing in Act 3. The librettists, Ilica and Giacosa, said, "We told you that was a bad idea. If you want Caruso to sing this part, you got to give him something more to sing." So they inserted an aria of remorse. Addio fiorito asilo, goodbye flowery asylum. Now Pinkerton feels bad about what he's done. So does that make him a good guy again? Far from it. He feels so bad that he runs like a coward. He tells his wife, "Oh, you stay and take the baby. I can't face her." You'll hear him cry, "Son vil." Italian, not for "I'll have the veal," but Italian for "I am a coward." Yeah, go ahead and cry, you big baby. By the way, a word to Kate. If you're expecting him to be 100% faithful to you in this marriage, good luck with that. Now, Butterfly comes the moment when she realizes that no longer being American, because Pinkerton's rejected her, and no longer being a part of Japanese society because her culture has rejected her, she has no options. However, in her own mind, she's going to be Japanese again, so she gets out the little sword her father used to commit harakiri, and she is going to take her life. First, she says, of course, goodbye to her child. I'm going to play some of this music because you need to understand what a extremely strenuous and difficult role this is vocally. Here is music of totally volcanic vocal difficulty erupting out of the soprano. At the end of a long evening when she's been on stage constantly singing all the time, she's exhausted. Now, like a baseball pitcher reaching back for something extra in the bottom of the ninth, she has to do her most strenuous spinto singing over an orchestra that cuts her no slack.
Che
And very tellingly, when she has committed the ritual suicide, pushing the sword through her throat, if you do it authentically, not through the disemboweling method that men traditionally use, and lies bleeding to death with her blindfolded son on her scene, and we hear Pinkerton's voice crying out to her because he knows very well what she's done, hoping to save her life. Her death, as the curtain falls, is accompanied again by the Japanese music of the geisha. In death, Butterfly the American has become Japanese again. Well, that's Madame Butterfly. A lot of craftsmanship behind just the musical beauty that we all enjoy intuitively. My thanks to WHRO for having me come in again and have the opportunity to talk to you. We'll see you at the Harrison Opera House. Be sure to join us for Madame Butterfly. If you can't come to Norfolk, come to Richmond. Come wherever you can and visit our website. My name's Glenn Winters. I'll see you at the opera.